Okay, so I'd like to introduce tonight's speaker, Craig O. from Oceanside.
I need some Wu-Tang. I don't need that. I need some Wu-Tang. My name is Craig, and I'm a recovered alcoholic. And before I, get into my lowlights of my life, I want to thank Scott for asking me to come up and talk. Scott was introduced to me from a good friend of mine. I'm the speaker seeker at our meeting. We have a Monday night meeting in Carlsbad, California, which is in the San Diego area. And Scott made a trek during the middle of the day all the way down to San Diego to come talk on our meeting. And I really appreciated that. And he told me, I'll get even, don't worry. And so this is the return karma. And so I'm honored to be here. It's always a privilege to speak at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have a sobriety date. It's December 7th of 1988. And for that day, I am tremendously grateful. That wasn't my first date, but hopefully that's my last. And, that day happens to be the Pearl Harbor anniversary. And so, I always joke that December 6th was the last day I got completely bombed. And so, that's an easy day to remember. So I do have a home group. It is the Monday Night Madness speaker meeting. It's on Monday night in Carlsbad at 7 p.m. I have a sponsor. I sponsor a lot of guys, too many guys. And I do a lot of service work, and I'm right in the middle of this thing here, because it absolutely has saved my life and given me something beyond my wildest dreams. They say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over, expecting a different result. For a guy like me, that definition would be finding a solution that works and then stop doing it. Okay? So as a result of that, I've kept doing the same stuff over and over. And what's been important for me is that none of the meetings that I go to, none of my fellowship groups are a glum lot. So, I really enjoy the energy, the music. You got a cholo chick, a cholo chip guy. That's hilarious. And every group is different. So I'm glad to be here. So as I said before, I'm from San Diego, but I grew up in LA. And my better half leaned over to me and said that this Dodger hat was really like an outside issue, and it shouldn't be on the table. But that's because she's a Padre fan. I'm the Dodger fan. Okay, so, I just leaned over and said, "Who's your daddy?" Okay, so that's... So I'm glad we won. And so I want to thank Chrissy for driving up with me. It was a long drive, 3 hours in the car with your better half. I've learned a lot of things in Alcoholics Anonymous. One of them is just say yes, dear. Okay? Let her control the radio station. And when she has to pee, pull over. That's it, And so I want to thank Pez for coming up and supporting me. Todd from driving down from Santa Barbara to support. Chrissy's friends for coming up. It's always a privilege and an honor. So they say that every good AA talk, starts with a bad joke. Okay, so I have one of these really bad jokes that qualifies for the grapevine. Okay, so if you've heard it before, I apologize. All right, so a sponsor and a sponsee went fishing in the middle of the South Pacific, and they ended up getting marooned on an island. The boat sank, and there they were, the sponsor and the sponsee. And they're marooned. They've got no way out. They don't know what to do, no phones, nothing. And so after about a month of being marooned, the sponsor was going nuts with this newcomer sponsee, right? And they're walking along the beach, and they're just talking about spirituality, and they said, we need a miracle. And they find a bottle buried in the sand. And of course, like any good alcoholic, they pull the bottle out, what's inside of this? They look at the bottle, they rub it, and a genie pops out. So the genie pops out and says, I'm your genie. I'll give you one wish, and one wish only, so you better wish great. And so they both looked at each other and said, is this for real? And he said, he's the genie. So the sponsor thinks for a second, and he goes, money, I've had that, good marriage, all of that. And he goes, what I really want more than anything else is to be back at my home group. I miss all my familiar faces. I miss all the love. I miss all my pals giving me a hard time, razzing each other. Mr. Genie, I wish to be back at my home group. Boom. He's back at his home group. So he turns to the newcomer, and he says, you get one gift. What would you like? And he thinks for a second. He goes, Maserati, $10 million, a harem. Wow. I can't decide. I wish my sponsor was back here. Boom! The sponsor shows back up. So, apologies if you heard that before, but if you're a sponsor, you understand. So, as I said before, I grew up in Los Angeles, right outside of LA in a little town called Gardena. And I just had a normal childhood, for two parents, stable home. Both of my parents were educators. Neither of my parents drank. There wasn't any abuse in my house. So I don't have anything to point to say that this is the reason that I turned out to be an alcoholic. So all of that was stable and normal. Okay, there was just no issues. But as a young kid, I can tell you that I was just at odds with my reality. I don't know what it was. I couldn't put my finger on it. No one ever did anything to me, but I just felt like I am in a place where that I do not belong. I don't like the world. I don't like this family. I don't like you. I don't like myself. I don't like anything. And I would do anything to escape feeling that way and being in that reality. So, I view that my alcoholism was my form of trying to escape my reality. And so my pattern of doing that starting when I was a younger kid. So I played a lot of sports, I had a lot of hobbies, I read books, I did anything to get away from being with me and my feelings, because when I was engrossed in whatever I was doing, I was absent from my feelings. And so I started escaping as an early young lad. And that was just my get down. And so I just always wanted to be anything but where I was at and what I was doing. And, that's what makes me an alcoholic. I cannot adjust to my reality. I'm completely maladjusted to my reality. And as a result of that, I need something. And that something turned out to be alcohol. But in my household, everything was fine, and I went to school. I was a good student. They skipped me to the second grade from preschool. Right away, I had that aptitude. I played sports. I got, straight A's. Everything was fine in the household, but me. My parents both had advanced degrees. I have an older brother. He served for 24 years in the Marine Corps and he ended up as a high lieutenant. I've got sisters that are attorneys. Everyone's a high achiever, and then there's me. I always say that I'm definitely the white sheep of the family. So, if you're laughing, you understand. I was just different. I felt different, I thought different, I did different. My mom would ask me things like, why did you do that? And I would just say, I don't know. And it wasn't until I got to Alcoholics Anonymous that I finally figured out what was really wrong with me. But I never knew. And so I sought all of these different fixes throughout my entire life. But there wasn't any, alcohol or any other substances in my childhood growing up. So, I was just a menace. I was the kid with the BB gun down the street, okay, with the slingshot with marbles. I was that kid. I'd blow up your your mailbox with M80s. You know, I was that kid. You know, we would ding dog ditch your house, you know, with dog poo in a bag and light it on fire and run and, you know, TP your house. You know, I was just that kid. You know, I was always into something, always doing something. I'd come running in the house and my mom would just say, "What did you do?" Okay? Back then, you know, my parents believed in corporal punishment. Okay? So, you know, my parents are from the South, so the spare the rod, spoil the child was real. Okay? And my parents would always say, "Hey, when we get back, if you act up, we're going to give you a beating when we get back." They'd get in the car and leave, and one time they came back and my dad said, "I'm going to beat you now because I know you're not going to behave." I was just that kid. And that just gives you a picture of what I was like, you know, growing up. And, you know, I just always felt different. But at the same time, I was arrogant. I was full of ego. I thought I was better than everybody else, but I just felt, you know, odd. I achieved in sports. I achieved in schools. I never did anything less than straight A's. You know, I was always a starter on the football team or the baseball team. So by all appearances on the outside, I had things going on, but on the inside, I was a mess. I was just never comfortable with myself. Nothing was ever good enough. And so I, you know, just tried to make up for it by overachieving, being the class clown, which I was. You know, how do you become the valedictorian and, you know, in detention at the same time? Okay? But that was me, you know, so I was always pulling pranks and doing whatever, you know, just to make people accept me. And when I was in the 6th grade, we moved from Gardena to Palos Verdes, which is, you know, way out in the suburbs. And I get to school and there's only 3 other kids of color there, you know, and so now I'm really feeling different. Okay? I'm feeling how I feel now. I see it, and I'm treated different. And that's another way for me to retreat and withdraw. And now I know I'm different, and I'm uncomfortable, and I'm getting in fights all the time. You know, I'm not going to stand for any name calling or any of that. That ain't happened. You know, so I'm getting suspended from school, and I'm having all these issues going on. But at the same time, I'm getting great grades. You know, and after a while, I started making friends with some of these kids, and I would do anything to fit in, And, you know, so I just continued to live a life of a chameleon. If I'm hanging out with the jocks, I'm the jock guy. If I'm with the nerds, I'm the nerd guy. Okay? And that's just who I was. And, you know, everything was fine. And then I didn't start drinking until I was 17. Okay? I didn't start drinking until I was 17. I had my first drink when I was 17 years old. And I was in with some friends. They pulled up in one of those 1972 Econoline white Ford vans, you know, the kind with no windows. You know, like, don't get in the van. Do not get in the van. And I got in the van, and they were in there drinking and doing their thing, and someone offered me a beer, and I didn't want it. Because, you know, I grew up in the 70s. And people that smoked pot and drank beer were bad kids. And my parents went to church, they dragged me to church, and I did all that, and I didn't want to be a bad kid. So, you know, that never appealed to me. I was told to shun that. And so I just wasn't interested. But because I'm a chameleon and a people pleaser, I, you know, give in to the peer pressure and had that first drink. Okay, and I hear a lot of speakers say that, you know, that was it. I found it right away. It was disgusting. You know, I had some Lowenbrau beer. It didn't taste good. It didn't do anything for me. Remember Lowenbrau? It didn't do anything for me. And I just said, I don't get it. This is just no good. And I went home and just shrugged it off like whatever. And then they came around the next day. Don't get in the white van. And I got in the white van. That night I had 2 Lowenbraus. That didn't do anything for me. And so I said, I don't get it. About a week later, I'm across the street at this young lady's house. See, there's always a girl involved before it gets really bad. So, you know. And we raided her dad's liquor cabinet, and I thought that I knew how to make a screwdriver. Okay, so I made a screwdriver with about this much vodka and this much orange juice. Okay, I downed that. And that's when it hit me. That's when I figured out what all the fuss was about. It immediately made all those feelings go away, okay? It didn't make me feel greater or any of that stuff. It just made me feel okay with my reality. And I said, this I like, okay? Never mind that I puked, passed out, and my dad found me in the kitchen, laying in vomit. Never mind that part, because I felt that I found what I was looking for. This is going to make everything okay. And that's when it started. And so that was between my junior and senior year. So I was on the football team. I was in line to get a academic scholarship to Stanford. My parents had, done what they had to do and script and scraped and got me to all these advanced classes, and I was on my way. I had to do a few more extra credits. I had to do some volunteer work, write a term paper, and I was in. And I started drinking. And within 6 months, I'm kicked out of school. I'm off the football team. I've been arrested 3 times, scholarship gone. 6 months. And you would think that a rational person would say, yeah, I think I need to stop messing around with drinking and smoking pot. But for me, that was my solution. That was the only thing that made this world livable. And I just couldn't give it up. And over the next few years, my life just fell off a cliff. I started getting involved in all kinds of crazy behavior. I started getting arrested all the time, just for stupid stuff. I would get arrested for a stolen radio that someone sold me. And then I'd get put on probation, but I wouldn't go to probation because they said, look, if you show up and do a drug test and you fail, we're going to lock you up. And I knew I was going to fail, so I go to probation. So it's just simple math. Okay, if you don't go to probation, they give you 30 days, right? They catch you with the drug test, you get 3 years. So I just said it's simple math. So I did that whole probation on the installment plan. Okay, I do 30 days here, 60 days here, 90 days here. But it never crossed my mind to stop drinking and doing what I was doing. That never even was a thought because that was my solution. And so, I started having major consequences. As a result, I started doing other drugs. I got really hooked on doing too much cocaine, and that just made everything completely worse all the time. And it was always drinking and doing cocaine. That's what really drove me down to the bottom. And by the time that I was 23 years old, I already had 3 felonies. I was in lots of trouble. Cocaine back in the 70s was very expensive. So I had to resort to all kind of criminality to make that happen. I tried to be a dealer. That didn't work out too well. They say a monkey can't sell bananas. Okay, so me trying to do that didn't work out very well. So, I ended up doing all kind of crazy crimes just to support, what I was doing. That whole lifestyle I was unwilling to let go of. And eventually, I just got sick of the petty stuff, and so, I was always high aptitude with computers, so I got into computer coding, which led into hacking in the banks. And so I started, pilfering accounts at the bank, and I said, this is easy money, because back then the algorithms and security measures were not very strong, and that's what I was doing. I was making a lot of money, and I said, this isn't so bad. I can party all night and do what I want to do, and I don't have a job, and I'm living by the beach, and this is grand. Until I got to the point to where I couldn't do it anymore. My use got really crazy. I had this job. I got fired from the job. I begged my boss to keep me on, and he made me go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm 23 years old, and he goes, you got to go to AA. And I said, what's that? And he goes, it's a program for people that want to stop drinking. And I'm thinking, I don't want to stop drinking. Why are you sending me there? And so over the next few years, as I was introduced to AA, the truth of the matter for me was, I just wanted my circumstances to change. I wanted to stop sleeping on my sister's couch. I wanted to buy a car. I wanted to do the normal things. I wanted to get a girlfriend. I wanted to do the simple everyday things that I could have a life and not be such a result of my drinking and everything else that I was doing. Okay? So I came here to make the circumstances change. I had no interest in working the steps, zero. Because I had been involved in a lot of criminal activities. So when they said, well, you got to be honest, I was like, yeah, that's not me. Okay? And they said, you have to find a higher power. And I was like, yeah, I don't think so. And you got to pay the money back. I'm like, definitely not. So I thought it was okay for you. And the truth is, I'm sitting in the back, and because there was something really wrong with me on the inside, that, later, after I'd gotten sober, I'd gone to therapy and found out what I was really suffering from. A psychological disorder that has nothing to do with alcoholism, but is equally as bad. I had that all my life. And so I never felt that this was going to work for me. That people would get up and say, oh, I got a new car, my job is great, and I'd be like, oh, that's great, good for you. Or somebody come up and say, I've got peace and serenity in my life. And I'm like, whoop-de-doo. That sounds great. I'm not interested in that. I'm just trying to make some money. That's it. And so that was my introduction to AA. I didn't do any of the steps. I was in compliance, but I was never in surrender. Surrender and giving up was just, the kind of lifestyle that I led. You don't give up, you don't turn yourself in, and the last thing you do is go to rehab. That's for quitters. And I just wasn't a quitter. I just needed to manage things different. And, there's a lot of slogans in AA, keep coming back, first things first. I'll figure it out is not one of them. But that's just where I was. I'll figure this out. Something's going to change. I'm going to do this different. I'm going to do that. They're planning all these different ways to get my life together, and nothing happened. And so as a result of that, after being around the rooms for a couple years, I had a drink. I was out of town, and, I wasn't even planning drinking. I wasn't even planning it, and it just happened. And, just like the book says, I'm drinking, and I'm like, oop, too late now. Might as well keep going. Besides, I'm not an alcoholic. Because I proved to those people that I could stay sober almost 2 years without drinking, and I didn't work those steps. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm a party guy. I just got out of control. Okay? So it doesn't apply to me. But in the next 3 weeks, I was worse than when I stopped. The progressiveness of my disease took off really quick, and I was just completely floored. And I made my surrender on that December 6th, 9th. It was insane. The truth is, I just plea bargained with the power greater than myself. I said, please, God, help me. And it's been my experience that, my higher power doesn't respond to my words. He responds to the condition of my heart. And the condition of my heart that night was complete surrender. And that's what happened. I surrendered that night. I went to a meeting the next morning at 7 a.m. I'd been up for 4 days, go figure. And I said, I'm never drinking again. I'm done. I give. I can't do this because everything you told me would happen, happened. Everything that book said would happen, happened. And I got a sponsor. I started working the steps right away. I had an old school 1980s sponsor that they don't make those people anymore. That's what I can tell you. He would say things to me that you could get sued for now. And everybody in the crew had a nickname. There was Basehead Larry. There was Jim the Idiot Plumber. And they called me the genius. That was me. My sponsor would mock me and call me genius. But he would always say, genius, just get in the car. And he would just take me all over. And that group of men saved my life. They were able to communicate with me at a level that touched my heart. And I knew they were serious. I knew that they were sincere. And all they wanted to do was help me. And so, my head is like the frozen tundra. You just can't get anything through it. But, you know, those guys were like the sun. It just melted that icy head of mine, and it slowly but surely it started to get through. So I didn't work the steps and come into this program to be a law-abiding citizen or a good neighbor or a member of society. I did not do that. I came in because I was totally desperate, and I knew that if I kept doing what I was doing, I was going to be dead in short order. I knew that, and that's why I came back. I didn't want to die like that. I didn't want to die that pitiful alcoholic death. Not that way. I don't like a lot of things. I don't like to be told what to do. I don't like following rules. I'm not a joiner. I don't want to do any of this, but I just don't want to die. I've been able to live with all these mitigating circumstances throughout my life. You know, no matter how bad things got, I was able to tolerate it because going without it was out of the question. So I kept lowering my standards, and I accepted things that nobody should accept. But I wasn't going to give up until I had to. And so I came back completely desperate, willing, surrendered, and I did whatever they told me, and I actually did. And as a result of that, within 4 months, my obsession to drink was removed. And that was the first miracle that happened, because ever since I took that first drink, I couldn't stop thinking about it. You know, we planned to go to the party on Friday, and it's Monday, and I'm thinking about the party. Okay, and I can't stop thinking about the next time I get to drink or the next time I get to smoke some pot. I can't stop thinking about it. And it just stayed on all the time. It's like a virus running in the back of my mind on a subconscious level. We're going to go party. We need a party. We need a drink. And when I woke up one day and realized that that was gone, I was sold. That's when I said, wow, this is really working for me. So what eventually happened was I got indicted for those bank robberies. Okay, I'm sober a year and a half, and, you know, the feds came to my house. And, you know, I had been indicted, and I was facing 87 charges. And, you know, they're talking about 200 years because they thought it was a big ring, you know, because all this stuff was happening all over the place, and they wanted me to roll over and give it up. And it was just a tweaker with a computer. You know, I was in many places at once, sitting in my living room. And so, you know, I hired a lawyer, and he was very expensive, and that, you know, I'm thinking I'm going to prison the rest of my life. And, you know, I'm telling my sponsor about it. We're driving to the meeting, and I can't stop talking about my case, and, oh my God, what am I going to do? And he's talking about everything but my case. You know, I get in the car, we're talking, and he goes, hey, we're going to go pick up this new guy. Go get him out of the house. He's in apartment 3. And I get in. Let me tell you about my case. He's talking to the new guy. Right? We get to the meeting, and I'm like, okay, we can talk to he's out of the car now. Let me tell you what's going on. And he goes, go set up the chairs. You know, and I go set up the chairs, and the meeting was over, and he goes, what do you think of the speakers? Go stack the chairs. Go wash the ashtrays. Go do this. Hey, we're taking this new guy home. We're going to go to Denny's first. That was the big thing back then. We're going to Denny's, and they put the new guy in the middle so he can't get out of the booth, right? And he's stuck with all these crusty old-timers, and there's 2 young guys, and I'm just like, really? It's come to this? And so, you know, I fought the case for a while, and one day the feds dropped my case, you know, because what they were charging me with, I didn't do, and they couldn't prove it. That was my motto then. It's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And so they dropped it, but the state picked up the case, and they had the perfect charges just for me. And so I ended up fighting that for a while, but I ended up going to prison, sober. I was 4.5 years sober, and I had to go turn myself in. I had to go for sentencing. I could have got probation. I could have got the 4 years. And my sponsor says, I'm driving you to court, and I don't want to go because I know they're going to lock me up. Okay? He goes, you could get probation. And I said, probably not. I've already got some felonies. I've been a menace since I was a juvenile. They're going to stick it to me. They finally got me. And I didn't want to go to court. And he says, Craig, you know, you agreed to take care of the wreckage of your past. And I said, I did agree to that. And he said, well, how free do you want to be? And I said, well, I'm free right now. I go in there, I'm not going to be free. And he goes, you know, it's a short sentence. And I said, that you're not doing. And so I ended up getting the 4 years, just like I thought, which is a lesson. Whatever you think about is going to happen. And I kept playing that in my head, and that's exactly what came. So I want to talk real quick about what happened to me when I was in prison, because that's when the miracle of AA actually happened. First of all, I'm embarrassed I'm there. Now that I've been sober for a while, you know, I deserve to be there. You know, all the things they told me I did. And I realized that they weren't punishing me, they were protecting society from me. And I deserved to be where I was because of what I did. I didn't see it like that when I was hacking in the banks, but after I got sober and did some inventory, that thing called rigorous honesty hit and told me, yeah, you did it. You got to pay the price. And so, you know, I went to prison. And I'm not prison material. I don't have any tattoos. I'm not in a gang. And that's where I was. And I'm completely uncomfortable. If you've ever been in prison in California, it's a lot of racial problems. And I'm not with that. I hate everybody. Right? And so I've never been in a group. I don't want to be in a group. I don't want to be characterized in the group, but I'm forced to be in a group. And our group is going to fight this other group. And I don't want to be involved because I don't even know why we're fighting or what's involved. And someone came and gave me a knife and said, you're going to need this tomorrow. You know, we're going to go out and, you know, you better fight or we're going to get you. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I just stole some money. I was just trying to stay high. That's it. You know, and it was terrible. And I remember that night, I said, God, you got to help me. Like, I don't hate anybody. Sincerely, I don't have any beef with this other group. I got nothing against them. And I don't want to get involved in this. I've turned my life over to you, and I'm scared. Okay, I'm facing something I don't want to deal with because those guys in the gun showers will shoot you. You know, I just want to do my time and go home. And you got to help me. That night at 2 o'clock in the morning, the correctional officers came to my cell and said, pack up your stuff, you're getting moved to another facility. And I said, what? And they go, yeah, there's a bed opening, you know, somewhere else, you're going. And I packed my stuff, and I left. And I had several occurrences like that while I was incarcerated, where my sponsor says, you have to trust your higher power now. You are cornered. Okay, you can't talk your way out of anything. There's no money that can fix your problem. You can't call your lawyer. You're there. And the only thing you got is your higher power. And you're going to have to ride with that power. And there were so many instances that happened during that incarceration period that I prayed, and almost instantly or within a week, something happened that was in direct response to that prayer. And it hit me that, hey man, something's listening to my prayers. Like, this can't just all be a coincidence. You know, it can't be. Something's responding to what I'm doing and what I'm asking for. And even a knucklehead like me can see that. I'm cynical, I'm judgmental, I don't believe anything, you know, I mock religion, you know, all of that, but I'm like, no, dude, something's going on. And what had happened was I was introduced to the world of the Spirit, and I didn't know that. I didn't know that all the work that I had to do, all those chairs I had to stack, all those newcomers I picked up, had propelled me into a new reality. That I did not know. You know, and I finally called my sponsor, and I was telling him these things were happening to me. And I said, why didn't you tell me? This was what it's about. He said, you dummy, I've been trying to tell you for 5 years. Right? But there were times where it was difficult, where I would call him and say, man, I'm not getting out for 2 more years, man. You know, how am I going to do 2 more years? And, you know, like I said, I had a 1970s bully sponsor, and he said, one day at a time. How are you going to do that, right? And so as a result of that, what happened was, he told me one day to go help somebody. I'm like, dude, I'm in prison. Like, people here are just predators. It's, watch your butt, literally. I seriously, and I said, I'm not in an environment for that. He goes, just try to be of service to someone. And there was this guy down the way. We bumped into each other a couple times. He seemed pretty friendly, and I know he got some mail, and I saw him looking at it, and it just hit me, this guy couldn't read his letter. And so I asked him, I said, hey man, can you read that? And nobody was around, and he said, no. And I said, do you want me to read that letter for you? And he goes, could you? And I said, yeah, and I read the letter from his family to him. And I read that letter for him, and he was very grateful, and that was my service. And then I said, look, if you want to write them back, let me know. Just tell me what you want to say, and I'll write it for you. And he did that. And this guy's a different race, which was a no-no, but I didn't care. The moment was there, and it happened, and I did that for him. And I gave him the letter back, and I told him, you got to misspell some of the words, otherwise they'll know you didn't send that. So as a result of that, he introduced me to another guy who was a teacher's aide, and there were guys going to get their GED. And he goes, you should go work in the school. And so, his friend came over and introduced me to the teacher, and I volunteered a couple of times, and when he paroled, I got his job. And I was helping guys get their GED. Okay? That one kind act of service that my sponsor told me to do that I didn't believe in turned into that. Okay? In the cell block that I was in, guys would come with their homework, and they couldn't do their homework, and I had to go to all the different races and get a table set to the side for guys that wanted to do their homework, and they said okay. And that's God. So you can't tell me there's not a power greater than myself. You just can't. I didn't do any of that. I just showed up and did what I was supposed to do and did what I was suggested. So during that incarceration period, I went from that job. They assigned me to work for the Catholic chaplain, and here's a guy who's completely volunteer. He's in a wheelchair. He comes every day. We banter back and forth. He helped me get some AA meetings started, and I'm doing my sentence being of service. I ended up getting conscripted into the fire department. Okay, the prison that I ended up at last was out in the middle of the desert, and there was no fire department at all in the city of Riverside or going out to Arizona. It's out in Blythe. I don't know why they made a city there, but I ended up getting into the fire department, and I didn't want to go in the fire department. I wanted to just work for the chaplain, because I'm in an air-conditioned office, I'm watching movies all day, I'm running AA meetings, I got it made. I'm like, if you're going to do the time, this is it. But they said, no, the warden has requested you to go. And it turned out that I was so short to going home, and my aptitude level was at a point to where they said, there's only maybe a handful of people in the whole prison that fit our criteria. So you're going. And I went, and I ended up being a fireman. We were driving into town, putting out fires. And the people showed up, didn't treat us like inmates. They didn't even know we were inmates. They just said, the fire department's here. And I got to go on a lot of emergency calls and help a lot of people, and I got to show up and be of service. And all of that happened because I was willing to be of service the first time. And then all this service stuff and willingness started to make sense. That everything in my heart said, don't do that. See, because I have an unconscious attitude, okay, that tells me to say no. Okay? I have an unconscious defiance about me. I'm not even planning on saying no, but something in my subconscious convinces me to say no. I don't want to help anybody. I don't want to do anything. I don't care about anybody but myself. That's how I came here. And through trial and error, what I learned was that being of service to others was the key to happiness. And that was not something I would have ever known had I not been forced into it. And I got forced into it. And that became the great discovery. And so for me, what's happened is that AA was a program that I kind of got forced into out of desperation, and it's given me the world. Over the years, as time has gone on, and the decades as time has gone on, that book means more to me than anything else. Okay? What's in that book, the spiritual outline, the spiritual answer to what's wrong with on the inside of me is facts that I base my life on. I trust it that much. And it's become the answer. So over the years, I dedicate myself to staying on the firing lines. I work with a lot of young guys because I can relate, not to their music, or their baggy pants, buy a belt, kid. Anyways, but I relate to how they feel and what they're going through. And I tell them, no matter what's happened, you do have a higher power, and if you do everything we tell you to do, your life's going to get better. So what's happened is my life has gotten better. I haven't gotten rich, okay? All of those things where you ride off into the sunset with all the prizes has not happened to me, okay? But I didn't come here for that. I came here to stop drinking. I came here to stop killing myself with alcohol and other drugs. And Alcoholics Anonymous has done what it's promised. And that has helped me to relieve the obsession to drink and become happily and usefully whole. That's all it promised. And it has delivered on that promise. I can't move the goalposts and say, well, that's great, but I don't have the job, or I'm sick, or this hasn't happened for me, therefore I'm not doing well. No, I'm doing great, because those circumstances and situations are going to be up and down. That's just life. When I came in, my stock was here. Now my stock is here. And that's become a direct result of a power greater than myself, the application of spiritual principles, and the fellowship that have taken me by the hand, step by step, and shown me exactly what to do and walked me through all the times that I was scared. And for that, I'm forever grateful. I can never repay Alcoholics Anonymous for what it's done for me. Never. So I just try to make a payment day by day by showing up for others, being there, carrying the message, and trying my best to be a good example. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have my paper, so I'm going to wing it. Is anybody missing glasses in an orange case? No? Well, if you are, they're up here. And so, Tom, can you give me some directions? I think you have my paper. Awesome. Thank you. Okay. So let's thank our speaker again.